A warm welcome to our webinar on concentration issues, where my goal is to share with you this evening that concentration is in actual fact a symptom and not a disorder in itself. My name is Kiri-Ann Gordon. I head up Mindful Moves. I'm an educational kinesiologist and an advanced movement facilitator. But I started off my journey as a teacher, having studied FET and foundation phase ECD. I very quickly discovered that even my qualification didn't help me in the classroom with some of these kids. And of course, that's the reason why I went on to study more of these courses. At the moment, I'm very excited because I'm studying neurofeedback, and that is a way in which we can, through EEG, look at the different brain waves in certain areas in a person's brain. And as we understand what the different parts of the brain are doing, we can understand why it is that we're seeing certain issues. Through brain training, we then train the brain up so that the brain is better able to do what it needs to do in these different areas. I will be discussing a bit of this in this webinar, and yes, you're welcome to get hold of me if you're interested to find out more. As a thank you, I'm going to send you a free gift along with your digital evaluation form that you submit to me, please. And of course, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into what it is we're discussing this evening, just because we've got so much to cover in such a short time. The hope of this is also that it will guide you towards your next step. I believe you're here for a reason, and I believe that, this will help you discover for yourself what it is that you need to do in your life. So a disclaimer, please know that no medical diagnosis, prognosis or treatment will be and can be made due to the information shared in this webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to introduce you to the power of movement and learning. If you enjoyed this webinar, you're welcome to contact us for more, to find out more about our courses that train you up in the specific moves. It is important to remember that every person is unique, and what works for one person may not necessarily work as well for another. By continuing to listen to this webinar, you consent to the fact that you understand this and agree with all of the above. So we always start in our work with you, the client, in the center. And so I ask you this evening what your expectations for this webinar are. In our work, we talk about using goals. When you have a goal, when you have an expectation, you can map a route out. And if you've got a route towards to move towards that goal, you can very quickly decide what is relevant and irrelevant to achieve that goal. I absolutely love this quote. Okay, so winners make a habit of manufacturing their own positive expectations or goals, in my case, in advance of the event. And so I don't know where you find yourself, why you clicked yes to this. You've obviously got your reasons. I've just jotted down perhaps some expectations that I thought you might have, but you might have your own that you want to jot down or just take a mental note of. So perhaps you want to understand what concentration is. Maybe you want to understand the possible contributors to the lack of concentration. Maybe you want to find out more about different ways to assist people with concentration issues. Maybe to learn how to support people who battle to focus if you don't necessarily think it's concentration. Or you want to learn and gain knowledge so that you might be more compassionate towards these people who are battling. And perhaps you want to learn to develop strategies to better support yourself or people that you are seeing battling with concentration issues. As I say, there is possibly more, and this is your space to just take note. What is it that you wish to get out of this webinar? I want to begin with a story. It's obviously not a real story. It comes from the TV Kit written by Betsy Byers, and it's a chapter entitled School Days, the Test. So let me get going, and let's just see what happens to some of these kids in our classes. So Lenny leant over his desk, pencil in hand, waiting for the science test to be passed out. He always got a worried feeling when he was waiting to take a test. Even if he knew everything there was to know about a subject, something that had never happened, he knew he'd still be worried. He erased a mark on his desk and penciled it back. He beat out the rhythm from the Addams Family. snapping his fingers when he got to the 2 clicks. He jiggled his legs. He turned to the boy sitting next to him and said, "Hey, Frankie, is the petiole the stem or is the stipple the stem? I'm mixed up." Frankie shrugged. He turned round. "Letty Bond is—" "The petiole is the stem," she said in a bored voice. "The stipples are the extra leaves." She clicked open her ballpoint pen. Lenny turned back to the front of the room and raised his hand. "Miss Markham." "Yes, Lenny." "Can we take our tests in pencil or do we have to have a ballpoint pen?" "Pencil's fine." "But can we use a pen if we want to?" He asked on behalf of Letty Bond, who he thought might be growing anxious. "Either one is fine." Lenny's throat was dry. The tests were coming. He put down his pencil, wiped his hands on his shirt, and picked up his pencil. He took the tests from the girl in front of him, selected the top, and passed the rest to Letty Bond. "Here we go," he said with false liveliness. He glanced at Letty Bond. She had already written her name on the top of the page and was ready to take the first question. Lenny turned back to his desk. The test was mimographed in purple ink. And for a moment Lenny had a vision of a red 23 at the top of his. He let out his breath with one long unhappy sigh. He felt like writing 23 there and just saving Miss Markham the trouble. Glancing down at the page, he decided to skip the first part, which was fill in the blanks, and go to the second part, which was the plant with all the parts to be labelled. He had done that last night for the school teachers, twice. Very carefully he printed the word petiole in the line opposite the stem. Then he looked at the word. It looked wrong. Quickly he turned his pencil and erased the word. He wet his lips. He wanted to turn round and ask Letty Bond if she was sure that the petiole was the stem. It seemed to him. Nervously he printed petiole back in the same place. He printed in 4 more words and then got up. With his eyes on the paper, he went to the teacher's desk. "Miss Markham?" "Yes, Lenny." "Is that word spelt right?" "I'm sorry, but I can't give you any help after the tests are passed out." "Oh." He stood there for a moment staring down at the word he had written. Stupile. He had never felt more miserable in his life. He gave Miss Markham a weak smile. He said, "I feel kind of stupile myself today." "I do believe, though," Miss Markham went on kindly, smiling back at him, "you should look at what you've written very carefully. There may be something wrong." "Thank you, Miss Markham." As Lenny hurried back to his desk, Miss Markham said, "Remember, spelling counts, class." Lenny erased the word and respelt it. He filled in 2 more blanks and erased one. His test now had a worked over look. He had worn through the paper in 2 places. He thought anyone who thinks school isn't hard ought to take a look at his paper. He bent over his desk, wet his pencil point, and filled in another blank. He went on to the multiple choice section and filled in 3 of those. He glanced again at the word stipple. "Time's up, class," Miss Markham said. Lenny looked up startled. He turned to Frankie. "Are you through?" Frankie shrugged. "Are you through, Letty Bond?" "I've been through since 10:30, she said. He glanced at her desk. She was writing a note to someone named Anne. It started, "I am bored." Then he spun round and glanced in desperation at his test. Only half the blanks were filled. Quickly he began filling in the rest, guessing, putting anything down, so that Miss Markham would see a full, complete sheet when she got to his test. That was bound to make a better impression. "Lenny," it was Miss Markham. "Yes, he kept writing. He did not have time to look up. "I have to have your test now." "Yes, the next class is coming in. 1 more word." In desperation, Lenny kept writing. Cammy Hargendorn was standing at his desk, waiting for Lenny's seat. Lenny looked up. Hard, huh? Cammy said. Hard for me, Lenny sighed. He got up, dropped his test on Miss Markham's desk, and went out into the hall. Shoulders sagging, he went slowly to World Studies. So we're just going to think about poor little Lenny. My first question is, what happens to Lenny in the next class? What kind of attitude does he have coming out of this space? Now he's going to World Studies. How does he feel about himself and his achievements or his abilities? What happens to Lenny the next time he takes the test? And we've already seen this. He's already quite prepared to write 23% for Miss Markham. He already has such a bad understanding of his own abilities, especially because if we really understand, and I had to do a bit of research for this, not being a grade 4 teacher, Lenny was right and Letty Bond was wrong. She said it, of course, with so much confidence that it made him again question what he knew. But in actual fact, he was better, or he knew the work better. Having said that, as his thoughts and everything spiraled out, I'm sure Letty Bond would have done much better on that test because she was just so much more confident. So what happens to Lenny's understanding of who he is, of his gifts and his talents? What happens to poor Lenny's self-esteem? And so we see this with regards to tests. These children go into stress. They go into fight or flight. Blood will move from their brain and from their limbs to their heart and their lungs. And that's all fair and good when you've got a lion that's going to attack you because you need to run or you need to defend yourself. But when you have a test in front of you, you really need the blood to be at your brain so that you can think through the answers and that you have a sense of clear thinking. So many of our children are getting assessed when they're under this situation. And in our work, there is a course, if you're interested, where we look at the 32 different profiles in which a brain and a body will organize itself when in survival. For Lenny, we don't see that he has access to very much. And so we're not assessing Lenny's true ability here. We can see he actually knows some stuff. Instead, we're checking how well he can cope under stress. And so what has this done? Well, this experience has reinforced all the wrong things in Lenny. It has caused him to believe that he's incapable. And of course, as I said, he's being evaluated when he cannot actually think straight. One real-life person who probably could relate would be Einstein, and this is one of his quotes of his experience of school. So school failed me, and I failed the school. It bored me. The teachers behaved like sergeants. I wanted to learn what I wanted to know, but they wanted me to learn for the exam. What I hated most was the competitive system there, and especially sports. Because of this, I wasn't worth anything, and several times they suggested I leave. I felt that my thirst of knowledge was being strangled by my teachers. Grades were the only measurement. How can a teacher understand youth with such a system? From the age of 12, I began to suspect authority and distrust teachers. Very interesting, at 12 we see children are for the first time in their life able to make up their own mind and arrive at their own conclusions, which often ends up being fact to them. And through those glasses, they look back at all the experiences they've had since, and they color in the blanks. And of course, many of our children find that we as adults in their life come up wanting, that we have let them down in some way. And so often I have a teacher will tell me, oh, but they don't respect me. And my question is, when did you lose their respect? And maybe it wasn't you who lost their respect, but the adults in their life have lost their respect. And so it's definitely something that we do have to work on. We want to be the Miss Markhams to the children out there and not these sergeants that poor little Einstein is talking about. With regards to Einstein, if we look at the book and the words of Dr. Robert Malelo, his book Disconnected Kids, he actually goes on to explain that Albert Einstein spoke quite late in life. And had he been in a classroom in this day and age, he probably would have been diagnosed as having ADHD and or dyslexia. Also Dr. Carla Hunniford, in her book The Dominance Factor, has also mapped out his supposed profile, one of those 32 profiles that I was talking about. And we see a little Einstein who also can't think very nicely when he is stressed. Interestingly, also Carla Hannaford describes herself. She's now somebody who works very closely with children, and she studied biology. Um, yes, there's a whole lot of stuff if you want to find out more about her. And she says even herself, she would have been, described as having ADHD had she been in today's classroom. And so we do not want to put the roof on these kids at all with regards to the disabilities or the frustrations we are seeing in their life. Let's have some fun, or more like it, let's stress you out. I've got a little activity for you to try here. I'll be nice, I'll give you a minute. What we have to do is you can see that there are numbers 1 to 3 on the left-hand side with each of these patterns as such, and they correspond with numbers on the other side, 1, 2, 3. And we have to try our best or do our best to follow the path on each one and to see if we can arrive at the right one on the other side. Okay, but we've only got a minute. We're going to really evaluate you here. The person who does the best is going to get a trophy, and anybody who doesn't get halfway will have failed this test. It means that your concentration is really bad. So let's get ready to go. 1, 2, 3, and go. And what you're going to find, geez, I tried this, and I must say this is quite a difficult one. There was a few that I had to look at. I was looking at a few nice activities for us, but I thought this one is going to be awesome. This actually comes from Peter Prinsloo. She also uses it to check concentration. And you can just imagine while you're trying to do this, some of these kids are sitting in classes where children are clicking pens, scraping chairs, there's people talking outside. There's one little kid I'm thinking of, he absolutely hated pigeons. And he was at a school where the pigeons were roosting in the roof, and I can't understand why, but the school never closed actually those panels off, so they lived there. So much so, like scared, like I'm scared of snakes. And every time these pigeons flapped their ears, flapped their wings, ears, flapped their wings, of course, this child's focus would go. And this is all happening while he's writing a test, perhaps, and the teacher standing in the front shouting out extra instructions that weren't written down, and so some noises and stop. I hope that agitated you. Okay, so just to get a sense of what some people feel like, what some kids feel like as they sit in the classroom. No, we're not going to give out trophies and that, but we do know that on some level these children feel personally evaluated and that their own self-worth is being assessed as they do these exams. And so, yes, let's take a look. While you're doing this, I want you just to think back, or after you've done this, I want you to consider, how is your thinking during that time? Did you have racing thoughts? Were you able to see the patterns clearly? Were you able to follow through? Were you able to think clearly, as I say? Okay. What were your emotions? Were you a bit nervous? Were you anxious? Were you worried about the time ticking? And what sensations did you have? Poor Lenny described a dry mouth, and he needed to wipe his hands, so sweaty palms. So what physical sensations are you having? Are you having a racing heart, a tight chest? Do you feel this sense of nervousness in the body as well as you put on the spot like this? For me, I always find it interesting, but I still have like dreams of exams where I go back and it's this big exam I have to take, very important, and I just can't see the letters on the page. I can't read the questions, and I just know I have to be able to answer it, but I can't even read the questions. And it astounds me as to how just a simple thing like test taking, which is a part of teaching, as we a data collection, as we help children grow and learn, how that has become such a source of stress that even as an adult I sit and I think back to those days. Let's look at what it means to concentrate. This little kid, he's got a toy in his hand, but the toy is now shifted to the side, and his eyes and ears are looking forward at something new. Even his grandmother there is talking to him in the ear. He's not turning to her because he's solely focused on whatever is in front of him. And so concentration is the ability to direct one's attention in accordance with one's will. It means control over attention. It is the ability to focus the mind on one subject, object, or thought, and at the same time exclude from the mind all the other unrelated thoughts, ideas, feelings, and sensations. Concentration is a state in which one's whole attention is engrossed in one thing only and being oblivious to everything else. During concentration, the mind focuses on the object of concentration, and only one thought occupies the mind. The whole energy of the mind becomes concentrated on this one thought. And this is an article written by Ramirez Sasson. And so just to put it in simpler terms, I've also heard that concentration is the sense of being in the present. When I'm completely in the moment and I'm not distracted by thinking about and planning for the future or reflecting on the past, then I'm able to focus and be ready for anything that the environment that I'm in is calling my attention to, and the appropriate response that I need to then make in response to my environment. So just some synonyms: we got awareness, we got notice, observation, consciousness, heed, recognition, and attentiveness. We're going to begin by putting the person in the middle of the situation, and let's ask, how long should a child or person be able to concentrate for? It's a little picture of a little girl we used to teach, Shame, exhausted after a day's school. Childhood experts generally say that a reasonable attention span to expect of a child is 2 to 3 minutes per year of their age. That's the period of time for which a typical child can maintain focus on a given task. So let's look. Our 5-year-old is 10 to 15 minutes. Our 6-year-old is 12 to 18 minutes. And our 7-year-old is 14 to 21 minutes. I put this, yes, of course we can do other ages, but I put these together because, this is the age where we see like all these kids in the grade 1 class. The 5-year-old is sent too early. The 6-year-old, they're somewhere in that year, but the 7-year-old who's actually turned 7 in the January because they've, just because of fate, they've been born earlier on in the year. And here we've got this bunch of grade 1s, and they're all expected to sit for 20 to 30-minute lessons, while our 5-year-old can only sit for 15 minutes in focus. And he's going to be done or assessed by the same programs and assessments as that little 7-year-old, who is able to sit and concentrate for up to 21 minutes. What about adults? So whilst everyone's attention span differs slightly, research has revealed that the average adult human is only able to concentrate on a task for around 15 to 20 minutes, suggesting that most of us are struggling to maintain focus for a long period of time. Wow, so we give ourselves far more grace sometimes than we give our children. And in doing this, I was looking just at some of the curriculums that we've been put, or curriculums, daily planners, even sent by the educational department for even our grade R year, and how this time and this understanding is not lining up with regards to this planning. Lessons have been planned for 30 to 40 minutes while we're sitting with children as young as 5 in our class who can only manage focusing for 10 to 15. This graph here represents our concentration or our ability to focus as people in a set time. So yes, the one course that I went to spoke about 40 minutes, but as we've just read, it's probably closer to 20 minutes where I'm sitting and able to focus for. What I notice in terms of my focus is, especially according to this graph given to us by Tony Bazin, you can get it on page 42 of his book, Make the Most of Your Mind. It shows us that concentration is at the highest at the beginning of the session. It then dips to its lowest and then begins to increase a little bit again to the end. So if you follow there, you can actually see the percentages that correlate with this little graph on the side. And that, of course, is the amount of recall I'm going to be able to recall what I've just heard. So what do we as teachers do? Well, we get into the class, and when the concentration is at the highest, we look at homework or we do revision. We then go into our new concept often when this concentration is now dipping, and that's kind of where we leave it. Okay, and so if I understand this, I can flip my classroom around a little bit more. Perhaps understanding this, I want to introduce my new concepts at the beginning of a lesson. As they dip, that's when I'm revising and practicing this new concept along with older ones to start linking. And when I get to the end where that focus is beginning to come up a little bit more, because I know that I'm nearing the end now, that's when I create hangers. So hangers in our work explains the idea of putting out new information that a child's going to now have as a hanger or as prior information when they come to the next lesson. So I'm going to put out something new that I'm going to build on in that next lesson. We see in the middle of this, and this is what he proposes, these columns that shoot right up to 100%, and the one that says outstanding even more than 100%, okay? Those are the times, you can see it's labeled linked. Those are the times I can link anything that I'm doing in this new lesson with previous knowledge. And so just to understand how knowledge is taken in, because this is what concentration is it not? The ability to take in and recall information. And so let's just look at this for a few minutes. So when I get here and information's coming in, I've got to decide very quickly, this very efficient brain that we have. Is it something fantastic, outstanding? Because those things are hardwired straight away. That's my thin little thing that's gone right up there. Okay, those are the things that stick with us forever. And those are the concepts that are coming in with very strong positive emotions. Okay. The other columns there that are fatter are the things where I've already got something in place in my brain that I can connect to this new concept. So the brain goes, yes, this information is useful. I can connect it to previous knowledge. Let's keep it. Or, wow, that was interesting. Let's keep it. Other information that's deemed boring or doesn't have any emotional charge to it, okay, is quickly shifted out. Whether it's important or not, the brain doesn't understand that. It's looking at the emotion it's coming in with, and it's looking, can I link this to a new idea? And so this is going to be very important as we go on to one of my little videos coming up. Okay, think about it. I had a crazy teacher. He was awesome. He was a science teacher. It's usually the science teachers that are so wow. And I can remember him getting so excited about the crab. We were learning about the crab. You see, I can tell you at my ripe old age of 42 just about, he climbed on the table and he was jumping on his lab table about this crab. And I thought, flip, if he's that excited about this crab, I should be this excited about a crab. He also did some cool experiments where he took us to the top of the building and he let go 2 bricks at the same time. And we had to decide, which one was going to hit the ground first. And then, of course, he put a cardboard box at the bottom and we wanted to see if it could break it. And of course, I was like, gosh, if the principal comes out now, he's going to be in so much trouble. But because of the emotion that I experienced with this, it's etched into my mind forever and ever. And so it becomes our job as teachers to create a very positive, exciting learning space where things seem to be outstanding, to stand out. The brain senses the emotion that comes in with this. And it's the emotion that tells the brain how important the information is, not the information that tells the brain how important the information is. So you can stand up and you can say, well, this is very important, and the brain will know whatever they had to remember had to be important, but not remember what the facts were. Or you can, as I say, create a space where the emotions tell the brain, hardwire this, because this is something to take note of. With that in mind, boring versus exciting, let's take a look at this little video here. So here we've got a child. First video, he's watching a maths video. Same student, 10-minute time lapse. I see they changed his shirt, but the shoes, if you can watch them, and the pants are the same. Gosh, he's really spinning. And of course, the second one watching something that he enjoys, that he's interested in. Wow. Gosh, I didn't know children could do that on chairs. Very interesting, don't you agree? We're going to look at some symptoms of ADD, ADHD. Yes, that is not politically correct. I had someone correct me on this. If you go to the DSM-5, you will only find ADHD, and they no longer refer to ADD. However, I follow the works of Dr. Daniel Amen, who refers to ADD. And this is because through SPECT, through actually scanning the brain for brain activity, he has mapped 7 different types of brain patterns where children have got this distractibility or inability to concentrate. However, not all of them are hyperactive. And yes, the DSM-5 tries to distinguish between these two, but the name itself doesn't explain that. So when I only refer to ADHD, it makes one feel like it's one thing. Whereas when I understand it's ADD, ADHD, I'm open to the fact that there are actually different types of this. And just for that reason, I continue to refer to it this way, and also because doctors like Dr. Daniel Amen do so. Anyway, with no further ado, let's see what it's about. So we see impulsivity in some of these kids, unpredictability, we see mood swings. Some of these children can be aggressive or destructive. We see that these children are often emotionally immature. We see that they have sensory issues. They may battle with sleep. They may battle to change direction to do something new. Even the kids who are doing something dangerous. Okay? We see children who do not respond well to discipline. They're disorganized. They can be clumsy, and they battle with coordination. They battle often with fine motor skills. They have often poor hand and eye coordination. They may have speech issues. They may be labeled as dyslexic. Poor concentration and spatial issues, long-term and short-term memory issues, socially clumsy. They may have allergies or infections. Ear infections are often the common one. They even may have a hard palate, so that's within their mouth, little toes and fingers that curve in. And with some of them, we actually even see bedwetting beyond the age of 5. Okay, so is it always ADD, ADHD that causes these behaviors? Let's take a look at this very interesting little video here.
So I want to bring forward this one, and this one's really important, and it relates to the book Health and Light by Dr. John Ott, and it's about children paying attention in class. Now, I was one of those kids who didn't pay attention in class, and this is a really interesting thing to look at. So see that kid right in the back? The kid's kind of just doing whatever, playing with the chair, really not paying attention. What's interesting is it was noticed that in this book, Dr. John Ott talks about how fluorescent bulbs can actually make a certain portion or percentage of children not be able to pay attention and focus. And when they took lead shielding and they put it in front of the fluorescent bulbs, instantaneously that same kid moved up to the front of the class and became a very, very attentive student. So lights play a very big role in our ability to think and also influence our minds in many, many ways. This is a great book on this topic, but really makes you rethink.
Okay, sorry, it does cut short there. But yes, how many of our classes still have fluorescent lights? Our school buildings are often very old buildings, and they're still sitting with these tubes. And perhaps your child is being affected by the flickering of this fluorescent light. So that makes you wonder, what else could be affecting my child's ability to concentrate? In today, we also have blue lights, which I think it's the same man puts up a video. I've just got to find it. But he puts up one talking about the blue lights and how blue lights actually affect our hormones. And also the fact that our LEDs are more blue light means that our body is confused, thinking that it's daytime right up until we try to go to bed. Melatonin, which helps us sleep, is produced when it becomes dimmer and the body realizes that it's nighttime. And so this lighting thing is definitely a big thing to look into. I think you can actually find his book online. I think I did. And I don't know if it's his whole book, but it's definitely a very interesting read. He was a photographer. He started off with that, and he was taking pictures of something growing, if I'm right, under different lenses. And he started to realize how these different lenses had an effect, more so on this experiment that he was busy taking photographs of than the chemicals that were being introduced during this experiment. So it's in that book. Let me know if you want the copy I found. A very interesting read. Other things that we have in the body, if we're gluten intolerant, and we're going to talk about this later, if we are lactose intolerant or can't break down casein in the body, sugar, which causes inflammation. These are things that put the body under stress. So children are already in stress or in fight or flight because of what they're eating. Other things that we've got is toxins in our body, parasites, as I said, food intolerances, and this causes this child, as I say, to move into this anxious state without having even brought into the scenario studying and learning and having to sit still. So if it's not just ADD, ADHD that presents as a concentration issue, what are some of the other things that can be causing a child not to be able to concentrate? So as we've been speaking about, very much so, first maybe our unrealistic expectations, which are not age appropriate and do not take into consideration what a child actually can do. Yes, absolutely, we can have certain brain patterns and brain waves that we can see within children who may be battling to focus. Anxiety, as we discussed with Lenny this morning, and how he spiraled from a place where he knew the work to a state where he was just scrambling and unable to focus. Sensory issues. Retained primitive reflexes. This might be a new word for you, but we'll definitely discuss it a little bit more. We do have a webinar that we did on this if you want to get into all of that. Cross-dominance and stress profile, which again we spoke a little bit with Lenny, what happened when he was stressed. Visual perceptual skills, which we're going to look at. What about a personality type? What about a learning style? Do we change those things? What about lifestyle and the way we parent? And then what about the environment, as we just saw, and the toxins that's within the child's body itself? We're going to take a look at the following symptoms, which are true for all of these. For ADD, ADHD, for anxiety, for children with sensory processing issues, and for children who've got retained primitive reflexes. Primitive reflexes are automatic moves that a child has to help them go through the birth canal, to be born as such, to keep them safe, so for survival, and then to allow the child to move in certain ways when the part of the brain that is responsible for voluntary movement hasn't developed yet. So these are vital for all of the developmental milestones. And this is why it's so important as a parent of a young child to watch that a child reaches these developmental milestones. Skipping, arriving early at a developmental milestone, or arriving late at a developmental milestone are all very big red flags that these reflexes are still there. These need to get packed away because they are triggered on a physical level and they actually interfere with information coming into the brain. And so that means that the information coming in for processing is already scrambled or has been interfered with on the way in and possibly on the way out when they need to express it. So that's that little bit there. But as I say, we do have a lot of webinars and I do often talk about these in my lives. You're welcome if you want to find out a little bit more about that to ask on the WhatsApp group. So let's get into the symptoms. Okay, so with all of them, we see that this is a child who doesn't pay attention to detail and a child who makes careless mistakes. Okay, so that again can be due to the fact that I've got the wrong brain waves at the wrong parts of the brain. Okay, or like Lenny, I am anxious, or I've got so much sensory information coming in to be processed that I can't remember what the definition of focusing was, of concentration, was to focus on what's relevant and filter out the irrelevant. So when too much is coming through in terms of sensory input, I can't do that. And retained reflexes, it's getting scrambled on the way in. So then they can't stay on task. They don't listen or they don't seem to listen. It's not that they cannot register always what's taking place on a level where they can actually respond to it appropriately. Doesn't follow instructions or finish classwork or chores. Having trouble organizing tasks or activities. These children can tend to avoid and dislike doing things that take a lot of effort or concentration, for sure. When you're anxious, you're already overwhelmed. When you have sensory processing issues, there's already so much information going on in that little brain. When you have retained reflexes, we're going to see that sensory processing is rooted in that, or sensory processing issues are rooted in retained primitive reflexes. It becomes one in the same. These children lose things. They get distracted easily. Many of them seem to be forgetful. Many of them will climb, run, or actually be very much needing to move at what seems to be the inappropriate times. Their body needs to move often to help them calm down if they're anxious, to self-regulate, or to get the brain activated again. And of course, when they do this, when the rest of the class is sitting, it seems to be a problem, or it is a problem. So these children get up from their seat a lot. Innately, they're needing the movement and they know that they need to do that. They have trouble playing quietly. These children often don't have an inside voice. They can tend to interrupt others. They have trouble waiting their turn. There's that bit of impulsivity coming through. They're always on the go the whole time, driven by a motor. We can see the child who's anxious also, who's in that go, go, go state all the time. Other children who are anxious also go into this procrastination, and it has very much to do with the profiles I spoke about earlier on, whether they are somebody who is on the go driven by a motor, the left brain that kicks in and they have to just get things done but they're not thinking straight about what they're doing, or if they're more right brain and they need to step back and they seem to procrastinate and hesitate. So again, both those actions are pointing to anxiety. Talks excessively, blurts out answers even before the question has been completed. Let's look a little closer at each of these. So my famous ADD, ADHD. Dr. Daniel Armend does something called a SPECT scan, and he scans the brain very deeply. He's able to go quite deep and see the brain activity. And as I said earlier, he's mapped out 7 different brain patterns when it comes to children or people who battle with concentration. And each of these need to be treated very, very differently. And so I'd absolutely recommend his book, Healing ADD. I've read his book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, and he gives you a lot of information in there. I'll include some of this information in your free gift as well. In neurofeedback, we also see this brain activity. We don't use it to diagnose again, but we do talk about ADHD markers. And the types of things that we notice is that we're noticing not enough of faster brain waves at certain parts in the brain that needs to be there in order to do certain functions. Often with regards to this, we'll see a lot of high theta. High theta is one of the slower brain waves. And it's very interesting. You'd think a slow brain wave would be experienced as in slow thinking, but really it has the opposite effect on the brain. In the brain, it makes you feel like you're thinking very, very quickly. And your brain is in actual fact working very, very hard to keep up. And so it creates a lot of anxiety as well. So when we see high theta, we also see high anxiety, which is what we spoke about with regards to many of these children. The low beta, so that's the low faster brain waves that we want to see at certain points. And knowing what the different parts of the brain are doing, when we see not enough of the right brain wave at each point, we can understand how that might manifest. We'll talk about this next part also a little bit with sensory processing, but another marker that we see in neurofeedback is we see a lot of the middle frequency missing. And the job of this middle frequency is to filter out the relevant from the irrelevant information. That is the information that's come in through all the senses, through everything that's happening in the environment, that's sent forward to the prefrontal cortex for processing. So when this filtering system isn't working very well, it means so much irrelevant information is getting sent forward to be processed. So this little person is processing things that they don't need to. The little sound they heard, the clicking of the pen, the person talking outside. And of course, we need to assist this brain by balancing it and bringing up the middle frequencies, bringing down the lower frequencies, and bringing up some of the higher frequencies in the areas for task and for sequencing and for organization. So you can see why I'm so excited about where this is all going. So I've spoken a bit about anxiety. If you look at the picture, you can see the side part of the head. In terms of neurofeedback, that is where we see anxiety in the temporal lobes, okay? Yes, I do, as a Christian, believe that the amount of anxiety and depression we are seeing in the world today is definitely a bit of a spiritual attack. You know, when we are anxious, we can't think straightly. We are in survival. We're pulling at straws. And it's definitely one of the easiest ways to affect a person. Our immune system is shot when we're anxious because our cortisol levels go up, our adrenaline goes up, all the blood supply moves away from our brain and from the parts that we're needing to think straight and moves towards the heart and the lungs. And yeah, we see these profiles I spoke about with Lenny, and we are limited in this space. This is the way our brain organizes itself under stress. And when we're stressed, we're worried about survival. We're not worried about the algebra test. However, unfortunately, you know, the lion is not around, and in actual fact, it is the algebra test that's in front of us. But it's actually causing us to move into a place where we cannot access all our gifts and our talents. So as I spoke about in our work, we talk about these hot temporals. So we see a lot of high activity in these temporal lobes. High theta, as I spoke about, is linked with anxiety. High beta, so you can also have high beta in certain parts of your brain, and that's a lot of the fast brain waves. This is the brain that doesn't switch off, the brain that talks to you at 3 o'clock in the morning. All these words are going on, the brain just doesn't want to keep quiet. It's also the part of the brain that if we have, well, not the part of the brain, it's the brain wave that if we have too much of, we become hypervigilant, not what we want in our life. In terms of reflexes that trigger anxiety, so this is now, remember, happening within the body. It's an automatic movement. So it's not something that I'm cognitively in charge of. It's happening when it is triggered. Is we're looking here at the fear paralysis reflex. These are our children with the big eyes, the deer eyes, and they freeze. And then the other one, which becomes our fight or flight one, so our lashing out or avoiding, is our Moro reflex. Both these primitive reflexes are all about survival. And so when they're triggered, these children move into a state of fight or flight, of survival once more, because of course their body is telling them that they are in danger. Sensory processing in terms of where we look at the brain is the parietal lobe. And this is here they have to make sense of all the information coming in from the body, from the senses, and then integrate it. Many of the problems are the reflexes that are getting triggered as the sensation is coming through the body to the brain. And of course, that interrupts that information that's arriving at that part of the brain. As I spoke about earlier on, we also have things that we see in neurofeedback that is it's creating this inability to filter this information. And then, of course, we can have children who also have problems processing. So now all this information has been sent through to the front because that middle brain wave is not there to filter it out. And we might also find now it arrives in the front, but there's not enough of the fast brain wave to help it process all this information. And so in terms of neurofeedback, that is some of the stuff we find. Retained primitive reflexes. So our sensory processing problems are rooted in these being triggered. Okay. This interrupts the information coming in, as I said. And in your book, I'll give you the list. But we see these symptoms as being the symptoms that come out as the inability to concentrate, auditory issues, visual processing issues, fidgeting while sitting, and even bedwetting, which we spoke about earlier on. One reflex, the constant triggering of it, also leads to a high palate. And so all these reflexes, and again, this will be in your extra information, all these reflexes can line up quite nicely with the brain imbalances that we're talking about, with all of the little checklists that we're checking off. And so it's very interesting to understand that, because what I can understand is also, if this is genuinely ADD, ADHD, I can definitely start integrating reflexes, and I can start looking at balancing the brain to help this child. Unfortunately, this video that I've downloaded isn't in English. It's, I think, in French, and there were subtitles, but they didn't download with it. So if I can just explain what we're seeing. The first two children that we're seeing come from a secure home, but the others not so. I think the other children came from institutions. They didn't have a space where they were made to feel safe and connect with their parents. And what we're going to take a look at is the ability to focus on the task at hand. So the first two children feel safe. They can shift their attention to the task. So there are people standing in the room. So you can see their eyes and their fingers and their hands go towards the blocks and the play in front of them. However, the other children don't feel safe. So we're talking a bit about anxiety here. And they can't shift their focus from the environment and all these very many scary strangers standing around them to what's happening in front of them. And this is just to illustrate what happens when we've got the secure child who feels love, who feels safe in an environment, versus this child who is anxious and scared. Let's take a look.
Emmanuel, élevé dans sa famille, est avide de saisir tout objet nouveau en vue d'une exploration active, le passer d'une main à l'autre, le porter à la bouche, par exemple. Totalement absorbé par ces manipulations, l'enfant prête peu d'attention à son entourage. Christine, régulièrement confiée à une crèche de jour, ne semble pas présenter un comportement différent de celui de l'enfant précédent. Elle saisit les cubes des deux mains, essaie de les superposer, les récupère quand ils tombent. Elle aussi est tout absorbée par son jeu. Ces deux exemples nous ont montré le cas d'enfants dont les conditions familiales offrent toute sécurité. Par contre, lorsque ces conditions sont défavorables, au point de nécessiter un retrait et une hospitalisation, le comportement du nourrisson va s'en ressentir, ainsi qu'en témoigneront les séquences suivantes. Caroline, dont la mère s'est médiocrement souciée, est anorexique. Cet enfant porte bien la main à un cube, mais en fait elle s'y intéresse faiblement. Très souvent, elle jette un regard interrogateur autour d'elle. Son exploration reste active, mais elle semble surtout préoccupée par son entourage. Dans les cas qui vont suivre, le souci croissant de l'environnement et l'inquiétude décuplée auront pour corrélatif un amoindrissement de l'attention prêtée au jeu. Par exemple, Véronique, également anorexique, manifeste son refus en écartant ses mains d'un geste d'évitement. Si finalement elle saisit un cube, les regards inquiets qu'elle jette autour d'elle témoignent de son anxiété. Son attitude est figée, elle ne joue pas. Jean, retiré très tôt à sa famille et hospitalisé après plusieurs placements, épie attentivement les gestes du psychologue. La carence affective dont cet enfant a souffert semble faire primer chez lui le besoin de contact social qu'on pourrait motiver par le désir intense de l'enfant de trouver un substitut maternel. L'intérêt porté aux objets nouveaux est nul. Il acceptera sans résistance, mais sans intérêt véritable, le cube que l'on place dans sa main. René, dont le cas est similaire, se tient immobile devant les cubes. Au bout d'un moment, il fait mine d'en saisir un, mais il est en proie à une angoisse telle que peu à peu, il se désintéressera totalement et du jeu et de son entourage. Épuisé, il s'absorbe en lui-même et se réfugie dans une satisfaction haute. Sucer son pouce. Annette, qui est aussi anorexique, a l'attitude figée. Son désintéressement est presque total. L'anxiété grandissante se traduit par des mouvements de lèvres, des clignotements et par une respiration irrégulière. L'autisme se lit dans le regard vague de cette petite fille. Nous retrouvons chez Colette, privée d'affection et de soins, les mêmes symptômes d'autisme et d'anxiété. Gestes figés, respiration haletante. Ainsi donc, la carence affective suscite chez le nourrisson non seulement l'angoisse, bien connue des psychologues, mais elle favorise, en présence d'objets nouveaux et dans des situations inaccoutumées, une inhibition parfois doublée d'autisme dans les cas les plus graves.
As we consider anxiety and stress, I just wanted to pause and sidestep for a little bit as we read from Smart Moves, Dr. Carla Hannaford. I spoke about her earlier on She also says as a youngster she battled with learning and probably also would have been diagnosed as ADHD. And so she says, what goes wrong? And this is in this section of her book. I hasten to agree that there are people with specific learning difficulties. She mentions emotionally handicapped children. However, if we must label them, why not label them according to the underlying core problems rather than just the symptoms? I suggest the label so-so, stressed out, survival-orientated humans. So I'm going to just read that little bit of extra bit here, if you don't mind. What do I mean by stressed out, survival-orientated? I'm referring to the non-integrated, lopsided brain functioning and tendency to operate reflexively and or reactively from survival centers in the brainstem and the sympathetic nervous system. How does stress fit into the picture? Stress from various environmental, developmental, family, and social influences is a trigger setting off events in the nervous system that produce and regulate survival-orientated behavior. We certainly know that chronic exposure to stress inhibits full brain development and learning. Stress necessitates an overemphasis on survival-orientated brain processing at the expense of rational, limbic, and cortical functioning, especially within the frontal lobes. Consequently, stressed out, survival-orientated humans have less opportunity to develop nerve nets into the frontal lobes and may exhibit laming difficulties as a result. In the next 5 chapters, we will look at these detrimental effects of stress in greater depth. We won't read that today, okay? Best get the book. Here I wish to emphasize that the stresses of various kinds, some obvious and some less visible, are causative agents for many learning difficulties. As far as I can tell, my so-so label easily covers all the other labels we currently apply to learning problems. These familiar labels, including fetal alcohol syndrome, have been attached to the following patterns of behavior: excessive activity, hyperactivity, difficulties in maintaining attention and focus on a task, disruptive behavior, learning difficulties, inability to control behavior and alignment with social norms, marked discrepancies between seemingly high verbal skills, constantly talking, and the ability to communicate effectively, erratic, non-graceful, unbalanced, or poor control movements, insensitivity to the needs and feelings of others. All these behaviors fall within the realm of the frontal lobe functioning. The frontal lobes control fine motor movement, inner speech, self-control, and reasoning. I believe that people who exhibit these behaviors, my so-so group, have been exposed to stresses that require them to be more concerned with the survival than reason. Because of this, they lack integrated nerve net development and myelination into the frontal lobe area of the cerebellum. Another big issue is our vestibular issues, and this is an area in our limbic system that helps us with balance within the inner ear. And we have a lot of kids, and this is why in our work we'll ask a parent, how was your pregnancy? Were you sick during your pregnancy? Did your child have many ear infections? Was your child bottle fed? Did your child have reflux? Because this all has to do with the ear and also with reflux and all of that going into the eustachian tube, which helps with balance. Within this balance, we have something called the RAS, and this helps with the taking in of information. Okay, and so when we have children with balance issues, which points to this area of the brain, we're going to see quite a few things. And so I've listed them here. I will definitely add it in our work so that you can go through it a little bit more. But we have gravitational insecurity. We have increased tolerance for movement. So some of these individuals may struggle to sit still or remain seated. Some of them might prefer engaging in high intensity movements, like swinging vigorously for extended periods. Many of them are going to have difficulty with movement, balance, and posture, and it's common for them to lose balance. They may seem clumsy and uncoordinated, and they also might look very fidgety and awkward at times. A lot of these kids might have low muscle tone, and they also have like a limp posture. They look like they're relaxed the whole time. They prefer reclining when they're sitting. They frequently rest their head on their hands or their arms. They sit on the floor with their legs in a W shape, and they have loose or tight pencil grips. They battle with scissors, and they get tired after physical exercise or physical tasks. They have poor bilateral coordination, so they struggle with body awareness, and they struggle to coordinate movements of their feet and hands, such as throwing and catching balls. They find it challenging to stay organized, structured, and of course this affects their structured tasks. They lack clear hand preferences also with regards to this. Poor auditory and language preferences. It's possible for them not to know where the sound's coming from, to mix up sounds, to get easily distracted by sounds, to struggle with loud sounds. They seek confirmation from others before answering. They have limited vocabulary, and they also might find it difficult with regards to having reading challenges and trouble speaking clearly. Okay, spatial issues. Okay, they might have problems with their eyes, might close or cover one eye, squint, or struggle to shift their focus from the blackboard to their own paper. They might turn or tilt their head while reading, skip words or numbers or get mixed up with letters, lose their place when reading or writing, find it hard to maintain a consistent spacing between letters, struggling with the spatial relationships. They've also got poor motor planning, and so this can be challenging in terms of arranging tasks in a specific order, and they might face difficulties applying a skill learned previously to a new task. Emotional insecurity, they may feel discouraged, obviously very easily they're discouraged, blah, blah, blah. Hope you're following. Struggle with self-confidence, find it hard to socialize, and be hesitant to explore new things. We could kind of wrap up a whole lot of those symptoms just in this vestibular problem here. With regards to this dysfunction in this area, when we find this, these children, she explains in her book, often need to shift to reactivate the RAS within this vestibular system. And so them moving continually is helping switch this RAS on so that it can help them filter in this information. And of course, when we tell them to sit still, it means that they're going to battle with their concentration because that RAS needs that movement in order to work. So this is a whole lot to do with balance and how balance can relate to some of the issues we see in children who can't concentrate. I wanted to also share some visual perceptual skills, and this one is particularly foreground and background. So that's a visual perceptual skill. So children who battle with foreground and background is the ability to, on a visual level, look at and focus in on something of importance and let the rest fade into the background. Okay, so these children who have this problem will also have a short attention span. They can have concentration and organizational problems, will be distracted by irrelevant details, so even the teacher's clothing can be a distraction for them. They'll battle to find things in a cupboard, have reading as well as reading comprehension problems, find maths and story sums difficult, cannot discern between the relevant and the irrelevant information, and will battle to use a dictionary or find a word in a passage. They will also battle with categorizing, classifying, lose their place on the board, or when copying off the board. These children are going to appear careless because they seem to lose their place when they're reading. They skip over parts, they leave out words, and they skip lines. So even a very decorated wall, like in the picture that I've shown you, can be incredibly distracting to them because that focus could be on the board, on the posters, on the fence, on the other kids, on the bright colors on the side. And so I always caution teachers, yes, you want a rich print, bright colored classroom, but you really want to make your front board where the information is getting shown to the children as plain as possible so that their focus can be on what's taking place on the board. We're talking about these brain imbalances, and we again go, this is our lovely Dr. Robert Malala with his book, The Disconnected Kids. And he explains to us in this book what happens when some children have got high connections on the left side of the brain, but weak connections on the right. And so these are the characteristics of the child who has that brain imbalance. So these children don't feel their bodies, they have poor muscle tone, may have an odd way of walking or standing, noted in social skills, so of course they've got poor social skills often, may say inappropriate things, usually picky eaters and tend to eat things that other children don't even like, may be good at reading words but battle to interpret what they're reading, may be good at numbers but not at high level maths, have poor attention, be anxious and impulsive, so we're covering a whole lot, can even be compulsive, display inappropriate giddiness, so laughing for no reason, for silly reasons, may have outbursts of anger, especially when they get frustrated, do present with allergies or asthma, and when the right side cannot suppress the immune system, it can cause inflammation in the body and the brain. This leads to poor digestion as well as a rapid heart rate. So a child can also have a weak left brain, and this is something that we also find in our work. A little snippet out of Carla Hannaford's book, The Dominance Factor. I bought mine on exclusive books online. You can get it there. I waited a few weeks and then I had it. I could collect it from the shop. Really easy. In our work, also when we do one of these profiles I've been talking about, when we see how the brain's organizing itself, we often find that the children, or a lot of the children who are having these difficulties, also present as being more right-brained. And so we're talking about brain imbalances here. And so what I just wanted to show you with this graph, this is a graph that was put together having assessed 218 children, and they looked at their stats scores. And then, of course, they mapped them out whether they're more left-brained according to our work or more right-brained. And I just want to show you very quickly in this visual a very sad realization of these children who present in these profiles as being more right-brained, what happens to them. And so our first line in each, we've got the orange, that's our more left-brained child. We have our green, that's our more right-brained child. And our first column here is gifted and talented. You can see this graph completely reverses. So our left-brained kids in the system tend to do very well, and we've got many gifted and talented left-brained kids, but very few, in fact the least amount of children come across as gifted and talented when they're more right-brained. Normal is the next bar, the white bar, and we can just follow from the orange side to the green and see the difference. Remedial is the next, watching that between, or looking at the difference again between the orange and green. School, high school redirect, okay, and look at the difference there as it starts climbing on the green side, the children with more of the right brain profiles. And then special education. Again, this is very sad because we're just seeing again that these right brain children have a very difficult time when they are made to fit into situations and curriculum that are more based or supportive of the left brain child. So what happens if this tendency not to be able to concentrate is actually a personality? Do we medicate that? Do we treat that? What do we do with these kids? And so this is a tricky one because, of course, with regards to these personality types, you can't change your personality type. But we do, within each of these 9 types, get a healthy version and an unhealthy version. And we definitely want to see a child who is coping and thriving so that we can see the positive aspects of their personality coming out. Do we have children who are healthy or unhealthy? It doesn't necessarily work that way, but rather it's a scale. So we have times when I'm coping and times when I'm not. But when I understand this work and I know what their behaviors are for when I'm coping versus when I'm not, well, then I can step in with the support that they need. So yes, this is definitely something that we need to cover in another workshop or another webinar, but let's just touch on some of these behaviors. So our biggest one is our little number 7, the green person. You can see he is running away, okay? So he's called the enthusiast. What is he motivated by in life? He's motivated by the need to avoid pain. Well, what pain? Pain could be anything that the child decides is painful. Is sitting in a boring class painful? Is studying painful? Is being bored painful? Is pain painful? Is being scared painful? Is stress painful? And so as that child begins to interpret what pain means for them personally, so they're going to try and avoid that at all costs, running away, literally running. Their fear is they are afraid of that pain, okay? We see a sin with each type. So their sin is intemperance or gluttony. They want to fill their life and their day with things and with nice, good thrills so that they don't leave any space in their day for something potentially painful to happen. Their pitfall is then scheming, because life is not fair. Life is filled with stresses. And so they are always planning the next best thing, the next best thrill, how they're going to fill their space with something fun and exciting to avoid whatever they deem as painful. Getting back to what we originally said, the definition of concentration, this by its very essence means that this child can't focus on the here and the now, because they always need to be planning, making sure that something exciting is around the corner. Their defense mechanism is rationalization and idealization. So they tend to compare their life with this perfect image of what the utmost wonderful, great, most thrilling thing would be. And that, of course, means lots of things come of wanting in comparison to this ideal situation they've created for themselves. Self-image, I'm happy. And I'm good when I'm happy, optimistic, and nice. So if I'm sad or having a hard time or stressed, well, then I'm not good. And so you can see this is not being content. These children are relying on an emotion as their self-image. I can be content, because if I'm content, I can go through a hard time but still find peace in that. But happy is a fleeting emotion, and so I have to constantly create a space to experience this thrilling emotion. So their big keyword, as I remember going through all of them, for me it's FOMO. They are always looking to something else. Their head is always in that next space. And so these children, by definition, battle to concentrate. The thinker, he's a number 5. He's the need to perceive, afraid of being incompetent. He likes to hold on to things. He can be stingy, tends to self-isolate when stressed, likes to see through everything, know that he can see the truth behind it all. And they're good when they're wise, smart, and receptive. So, yes, very interesting, but what stands out for me is this. When they are stressed, when they aren't coping, they're going to become hyperactive and paranoid. And so my little 5 personality type, who is now all of a sudden hyperactive and paranoid, I know that they're going through a lot. They are in a very bad space. This little guy I just added because he drives us teachers nuts. He's called the leader. You're going to see why now. What is his need and motivation in life? Well, his need is to be against. So you say this is black, he'll say it's blue. You say this is up, he'll say it's down, especially when he's stressed. He's afraid of being betrayed. And his sin is that he's shameless. Okay. His pitfall is revenge. I'm dealing with a little one of my little clients who's a number 8. And I can tell you something, you don't want to become the what you call it, the muse, the center of his revenge, okay? And so we've got to be very careful with these personality types. We can't change them, as I said earlier on. I had one in a movement session and I didn't get him until he left. And then I said, "Wait, there we go. That's the leader." He was jumping on chairs or doing something silly. And I said, "Can I come to your house and jump on your mother's chairs?" Here came the shamelessness. "I don't have chairs, Doesn't care what I'm going to picture. No problem. I'll come jump on the bed." "I don't have a bed." Okay, he doesn't care. I'm now picturing him living, I don't know, on the side of a road. And so eventually he said, "But you don't know my address." And so I said to him, "Actually, when you fill in your forms, Mom's got to fill in your address. So I do have your address." So he didn't like that. So eventually I said to him, because these children we're going to see need to be in control, I said, "Either you can continue with the lesson or you can leave. But if you leave, you don't come back next time and we're having fun." Anyway, he stormed off, which was probably the best because I needed to cool down. And once he was calm and not wanting to be against me, I could have this discussion. And then I could make, as I say, give him that option again. And he was in control of the choice, even though one was, obviously the right choice, whereas the other one was going to be very bad because he's going to get left out of all the fun. The decision was still his ultimately. And so he said, "No, he's coming in." I said, "Excellent." I said, "If you do come in, you remember I'm the teacher in this class and you're going to follow what I'm saying." "Yes, no, that's fine." The next week, because you think this didn't have an impact, do you? The next week, somebody else started climbing on a chair and he very quickly turned to them and said, "Hey, she's going to come and jump on your chairs at your house." And so these are our children who we see defiance. Defense mechanism, denial. Self-image, I am strong. They actually don't feel very strong. That's why they have to be even more strong in the presence of all of this. And I'm good when I'm just strong and dominant. These children fear losing control. What about the kinesthetic learning style? And so often, I'll have a little one who comes into my space and they end up having the hat trick, the poor thing. They are more right-brained in terms of our profiles. They sometimes are a number 7 in terms of their personality, the green guy running away. And then we look at how they learn, and they learn through movement, through experience, and they need to move to learn. And this is a little hat trick that I talk about in terms of our work. And then, of course, we start looking at some of the retained primitive reflexes, and we see that they're also there, which doesn't help. So when you're kinesthetic, there's a cool trick to do that you can try with your children. Ask them to recall some information and look at where their eyes go. Children who look up to recall are often looking at where I saw that, so they're visual learners. Children who look to either one of their ears look at where I heard that. And children who look down look to where did I experience that in my body. And so you could very quickly and easily do this with your children and just see where their eyes go to as they recall the information you're asking. But let's take a look at this learning style. So actively doing something helps this child learn. They enjoy role play, acting things out, especially new learning, using concrete counters for skills, particularly like your maths, working through experiments or moving while learning. Older learners will benefit from case studies with regards to this. Discussing new concepts with others can also help this learner remember better. Break study sessions up into shorter sessions with breaks that allow for walking around and other physical movement and activity. Information is taken in best when accompanied with an activity. Active learning might include role plays and problem solving. These learners must move when studying. They may tap a pencil, click their pen, squeeze a ball, shake a foot if appropriate. This in actual fact helps them to focus, and these learners might find that typing can also assist them when learning. We don't want to get rid of writing itself because that is also a very powerful tool. One client I had was very kinesthetic, and I said to her, "How do you learn?" She said, "Well, when I lifted my arm up, the teacher said this." And so she was anchoring the very movement of her arm and that muscle memory to what it is that was coming in at that time. And so can you imagine when this learner is told that they can't move? Yes, in our big problem classes, this is a big problem. And we need to get this information back to the powers who be, or that be, that continue to cram children into classes, thinking that children only learn with eyes open, ears forward. That is not how all children learn, and we do need the space for these learners to be able to explore and be in contact on a very physical level with their work. Let's look what happens to this learner. So this learner needs to touch and do in order to take in information. These learners seek physical movement and can be good at sports. These learners like hands-on learning and enjoy drawing rather than listening or watching. They like to try things for themselves. They remember best when the learner has done it for themselves. Okay? These learners also fidget when they've had to sit for too long or when they get bored. And these children are going to be the ones that get into trouble for not paying attention or fidgeting in class. These learners may suffer from short attention span and find it difficult to focus when sitting still. The actual action of sitting without moving for these children is a stressor in the body, and we've gone through this. We know what happens when we include stress into the learning process. Earlier on, we spoke about some of the other things that affect concentration, and so we need to look at lifestyle. So according to Jilly Ford, we did a course with her on GABA. She explained in that course that ADHD, when we see this, we see a brain that is deficient in nutrients. Madeleine Helm is also a nutritional researcher, and she does some many awesome Zooms if you're interested in listening. And she talks about that they often find also yeast in the brains of children that are suspected to have ADHD. Other things that contribute to these behaviors are lack of routine. So lack of routine at the home, lack of routine at school, okay? Poor sleep patterns, so these children are just exhausted. Their brain is actually not getting enough sleep, not cleaning itself up properly at night. We have lack of emotional development due to instant gratification and little cause and effect teaching. Overprotective parents can also get in the way. Inappropriate expectations of teachers and parents. We've actually explained quite a lot of this today. Reward systems, weak reward systems, as we've heard with poor Albert Einstein, that only reward certain types of learning styles. We think back to the orange, the graph, and the orange and the green, the different types of learning styles that we have, only rewarding those who are left brain thinkers. Albert Einstein would have actually fallen on the green side. I bet that's not a surprise to you. Video and TV games. I'm going to include in your booklet a whole write-up from Robert Malello and what he has to say about brain imbalances and these. Fast-paced life, the fact that we expect it to move so quickly between all these different things and keep up. the fact that we're taught to multitask, that we've got all our tabs open at once. Toxins in the body, we mentioned this type of stuff when our body is actually in fight or flight because of the physical things going on in our body. And then we've got problems like if we have got low iron or even high iron, vitamin B's and D deficiencies and like other type of things like that. Other things that could cause problems is low magnesium and potassium and low omegas. Allergies also create problems in the body because the body shifts into that fight or flight as it's trying to protect itself against these threats it feels that are coming in. Mind, let's take a look at this video and the effects of food, our Western diet, and rats.
One of the criticisms of the anti-sugar scientists is that too much of their evidence comes from animals, not humans. That said, here at Brown University in Rhode Island, they're doing studies they think should make a lot of humans nervous. This rat is perfectly healthy. Put him in a vat of water and he finds his way to safety every time.
5.2.
Now, look at this guy. What he's been eating is the equivalent of a North American diet, complete with all the fats and sugars we regularly consume. He doesn't know where to go. His brain has been damaged.
These rats were totally normal, and then they turned into demented animals. They don't remember their learning after even a day. And as the challenge gets harder and harder, they fail more and more, just like a human with Alzheimer's disease.
36.2.
In this lab, the belief now is that Alzheimer's is really diabetes of the brain, linked to insulin levels, which can be affected by too much sugar. Professor Suzanne Delamonte.
Insulin resistance, we now know.
So a question for you, healthy or not healthy? This is what I often see in children's lunch boxes. And so we spoke about food and gluten and all of these. We're going to get onto it just now, but Madeleine Helm in her Zooms explains that there's a lot of research being done by a Dr. Alessiano Fasano. And he explains that many of our children with these kind of issues, our concentration issues and all of that, have potentially got a gene called I'll have to get to it on the next one. But this gene actually doesn't help in terms of breaking down certain products such as your milk protein in bodies and gluten. And so many of these children actually are gluten intolerant, maybe intolerant to lactose or that casein product from the milk. They are also potentially intolerant towards eggs as well as oats and those other sorts of things. And then, of course, we add sugar, which for all people is a very big no-no, as it causes inflammation in the body. And so these might be seen as a healthy lunch. Yes, I added the Red Bull. I once had a little 5-year-old come to school with a Red Bull. So that's why it's there. It's not a mistake. I've actually seen this and had to explain to parents that we don't give our children these type of drinks and that they are incredibly dangerous. But even the healthy ones here, like our sandwich, we've got the bread, which is our gluten and refined sugar, and then we got the cheese, which is our dairy. If this child has got a compromised gut, so what happens with many of these children, they've got little finger-like structures in your intestine which absorbs food. And these little villi are what's actually absorbing the food, not your stomach. Your stomach breaks it down and it gets absorbed in the intestine. Well, these flatten. And when we continue to eat all these wrong things, this little one cell intestinal wall starts pulling also apart. And then we very quickly have what we call leaky gut syndrome. And so now full food particles leak through our gut and they make their way into the bloodstream. The bloodstream doesn't know what that is. Is it a pathogen? What is happening here? And so it starts to attack this food particle that's come through into the bloodstream. And of course, it starts registering that this is something dangerous. And so we see these autoimmune diseases grow and these intolerances and sensitivities develop. What happens that's even worse is that this also happens with regards to the blood-brain barrier and our little proteins from our milk and all those type of things actually are seen or work as an opioid in the brain. And so opioids are like our painkillers, they help us feel good. And so the very things that are causing all these issues and sensitivities and problems in our children are in actual fact the things that they will go to first to eat. And so what do our picky eaters eat? I've seen it. Well, they get sent to school because they don't chew. They can't chew. Often their reflexes like their root and suck are still there and they can't chew properly and they've got low muscle tone, and they get loads of yogurt, or they get loads of very unnutritional noodles, or they get the healthy inverted commas sandwich, the cheese sandwich. I've even seen the chocolate spread. Then we start adding the sugars. They get the crisps with all those wrong greasy oils. They get the Viennas, the processed meat. Pork also is very similar in its makeup to the human structure. And so when we're eating sausages and Viennas and pork, and these leak through our gut, well, the body confuses what is the pork and what is us. And so we can see how that can create such nonsense in our body. Fruit juices are often also packed with extra sugars. They're not natural, and we do have to be a little bit cautious about our natural sugars that we're eating. I've seen a kid pull out a whole roll of Oreos at school. Sodas and Coca-Colas, well, these also push the acidity right up in our body. And of course, once we've got an acidic body, well, that's where disease and other sorts of things thrive. And so really, it is very important to start looking at what it is that we are eating. And this is also the reason why so many children who have managed to change their diet have seen a difference, because on some level they've already started dealing with that yeast in the brain that of course has gone through their, gotten access to the brain through this compromised gut. And of course they start seeing far less inflammation in the brain. The body also is not having to be in this fight or flight mode all the time when we start eating more healthy foods. So what happens if we have leaky guts and leaky brains? Well, the gut is the second brain. And we also learn about the HLA-DQ genes. So that's what I was talking about before. And so here's a beautiful image that we were sent from Madeleine Helm, just to explain what happens with these kids. And so children who have the DHA-DQ genes, it could be the DQ8, the DQ2, a lot of them don't have enough renin and these other enzymes that help break up the gluten and the casein. As you can see, they're little Pac-Man things showing you there. So they're not created, or not enough of it's created in the liver. And then what happens is we also get these villi that end up getting flattened. And of course, these cells start pulling apart like I explained. And these food particles then start going through and ending up in the bloodstream, where you can see all these cytokines and T cells and all of these are trying to attack it. Okay, so what is the symptoms of having a leaky brain as such? So it would be brain fog, dizziness, irritability, depression, anxiety, concentration troubles, memory problems, fatigue, and then headaches and migraines as well. So I hope you're not completely overwhelmed at this point. The answer, what we can do, is actually very simple. And so yes, we've listened to that it possibly is ADHD and the actual brain pattern and brain activity at different sites. Yes, it possibly is sensory processing issues or anxiety or our dominance and our profile that we see playing out, or even our retained primitive reflexes. But what can we do? So we first need to understand that primitive reflexes are a sign of an immature nervous system, because they are there first and need to go away as the brain develops. When I still see them in children who are supposed to have reached all their developmental milestones, that is a sign that there's something immature in this nervous system. And because of this, there are also signs of dysfunctional disconnect syndrome, which Dr. Robert Malelo talks about in his book. That being the disconnect between the brain and the body, as well as the brain imbalances where we see the disconnect between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. And so ADHD are brain patterns and brain waves, anxiety, retained primitive reflexes, cross-dominance, stress profiles, or our visual perceptual skills, and even our sensory issues. Well, we need to start bringing in with these children a movement program to pack away the retained primitive reflexes. And if we start bringing in brain training in terms of neurofeedback, we can start helping the brain balance itself according to these issues. And then when we look at specifically at the ADHD and brain waves and all of these and the anxiety, we can also start saying, well, let me take out gluten and dairy and sugar, and let me start supplementing this body so it can heal itself and get rid of that inflammation. So where could we start? So you could absolutely look at booking a profile session, and during this profile session we can look at personality types, learning styles, we can look at the primitive reflexes that are still active in your child. We can also look at, gosh, I've just gone blank. There we go, the profiles, the way they organize themselves under stress. And we can also look at your brain activity, the different brain waves we're finding at the different parts of the brain and what that means for you. But for you to go home tonight, perhaps you just want to say, okay, great, we're going to start with cutting out gluten, dairy, and sugar. If you really want to, you can actually even ask to go for some of these tests. Then you can go and get yourself checked for the gluten IgG or milk IgG, egg IgG, or oats IgG, if your body is sensitive to that. Definitely go look and see some of the work of Professor Alessio Fasana. He's got some articles in the medical journal, and you can also read the work of Dr. David Perlmutter. If you want those names, let me know, and I'll send them on in the WhatsApp group. Okay. There are also ways to do DNA testing. I'm not sure offhand where you could find them, but I can get contacts if you want. And then you could actually check for yourself if your children have these HLA-DQ genes, which are going to affect the gut and the villi, and of course the enzymes that the body needs to break them down. Other than that, I do sell, if I could say, or I can source some of the following supplements for you. I have got a little AIM store that I can send you the link for, and then what you can do is you can purchase them directly through that link, and these things will get delivered to your door. If you like this kind of stuff and you like me and you want to actually, be sharing this with other people, you can become a member, and then you also get a 5% discount on the products that you're selling. So you can see with regards to the AIM company products, they're all very natural. A lot of them are gluten-free, non-GMO, vegetarian. Some of them are also kosher. And so Madeleine Helm recommends Barley Life, and she asks to give a teaspoon daily to your child with regards to this. This will heal and seal that leaky gut. And so already, it's going to help that child with these things coming through. She also talks about Flora Food, which is the next one. And she says she would advise giving 2 Flora Food capsules daily. That will feed your gut biome and start also getting rid of the nasty bacteria that we don't want there, the yeasts and all the other things that grow in that acidic environment. If you're not looking to change your diet, if you're looking at this and you're saying, Kerry, this is just way too hard to start, then I suggest the Pro Enzyme, and that you're going to have with every cheat meal, because that's going to help break the food down so that it's not such a big issue. I know they actually did an experiment in one of our webinars that we watched, where they showed if you put this pre-enzyme with some of the food, you'll see how it starts breaking it down so that the body can at least deal with that better. Okay, she also speaks about 3 omega capsules daily. This nourishes the brain and the myelin with obviously using your omega-3. We've got this one, the omega one, okay? If you're finding that your child has a severe sensory overload, she suggests giving 2 or 3 of the Omegagenics EPADHA capsules instead. And that just depends on the weight as to whether you're going to give them 2 or 3. Again, if you want information on that, get hold of me. If you're finding that your child has a lot of anxiety, composure is also great. So you can give 2 composure capsules every morning. And then children who are battling to sleep at night, we've got a brilliant, it's called CWR, Magnificent it's called, and it's all magnesium, and you put it in the water, and of course this gets into the cells and helps the body to relax a bit better. It's very important to keep your child's blood sugar stable. We've just watched that thing about the rats. And of course, if your child has got problems with oats, we want to take oats away, but also gluten foods. And it's very important that they be on glycerol for life. And so that's just something, if you want to find out more about it, I will definitely get more information on that for you. So as a parent, you can find out more about the HLA-DQ genes. You can find out about the villi, which we've chatted about, the IgG inflammation in the body, and if you want to test, how to test them. You usually want to give, it's within 6 weeks that we see that this focus starts improving once you start eliminating these foods and bringing in some more of these supplements. If you're still feeling a bit stuck, I trust that the free gift is going to help you. It's going to give you the space to at least go through what we've discussed tonight in detail and at your own leisure. Although you do know, with this being the way it is, you can stop and start this session and go back as many times as you want. Okay, so there we go. Go through your free gift. We've also got concentration courses, and it's actually got 10 CPTD points, this one. So the extended version of this course is called Solutions to Impaired Concentration, where we really delve in and go into detail, as I say. And other than that, feel free to contact me. So there's my number, there's my website, there's my email address. Get in touch. Let's see if we can book a profiling session. Let's see what is your particular child's issues. Getting back to what's so important again is that we can't put children in a box, because every single child is unique, and while the symptoms might be similar, the causes aren't. I'll just go through some of the books I've used for this webinar and what I recommend reading. So I did speak about Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. Fantastic book. I've read that. And of course, Dr. Daniel Amen talks about the 7 types of ADD in this book. If you want to specifically learn about ADD, he's got the book Healing ADD. I'm currently reading this book, which is also fascinating, The End of Mental Illness. Dr. Robert Malelo not only explains all this stuff to you in this book, Disconnected Kids, but he actually gives you a program to work through with your children with regards to brain balances, where we can use movement to help. The Dominance Factor by Carla Hannaford, that's where we spoke about some of the stuff coming up tonight, some of the profiles. We've also got workshops and workshops and courses based on this book and her work. And another fantastic book, which I've read a bit out of tonight, is Smart Moves, Why Learning is Not All in Your Head. I just want to thank you for having sat in and listened to this webinar. I trust that now, as you go back and look at your expectations, that a lot of your answers or questions were answered. If not, please get hold of me. Let's discuss anything else that perhaps is particular to your situation. And let's just see how we can support you. We do offer many other courses. I'm not going to read them all, but these, of course, can go on to help and support you, whether you are a parent, whether you are a teacher, an au pair, whether you're just wanting to use these things yourself in your own life. Just take a look. And, of course, you're welcome to look on my website. What I've done there is I've actually started including some short introductory courses on each of these, so you can just get a feel as to what we're going to learn in each of these courses. Otherwise, it's been an absolute pleasure. Take care, and we'll chat soon.